I'm ring the bell. Good morning. Glad to see everybody here this morning. I think that the cold weather is fast approaching. We had a little fire last night, and I just wore a sweatshirt. I about froze to death. Anyway, we're studying in Deuteronomy, the 31st chapter, and Bill got through the first 3 verses last week. We're going to kind of go back over those just a little bit to kind of keep everything in context. So basically, here in chapter 31. Moses had pretty much laid out all the things that he needed to lay out to the people up to this point. And what he's doing here in chapter 31 and the next couple chapters, he's kind of making the final arrangements and kind of tying everything together, getting the leadership in position and laying out just a few more things that needs to be done. And these are the events that are going to kind of conclude the book. So hopefully we'll get through quite a bit of this today, and Bill can hopefully start maybe even a new chapter next week. One thing I do want to mention before we get started, I want you guys to kind of be thinking about where you want to go after this. Bill and I have had some discussions, but we really haven't come to any conclusion. If you've got any suggestions, we're absolutely open to it. So think about that next couple of weeks, because it shouldn't be too long that we'll be finished our study here in Deuteronomy. So before we go any further, I'd like for Mark Campbell, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Father in heaven, we're thankful for this morning, for this day that pray we'll come out and worship and study the Word together. Pray that you give David recollection on the words that he studied and can present them to us in a way that we can apply to our daily lives. Pray, Lord, for those who are not here, who can't be here due to sickness. We just pray that you would be with them and comfort them. Father, we pray that you be with us throughout this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So what we're going to see here in verse chapter 31 also is a major change in leadership of the children of Israel. And we have to kind of keep in mind that that the true leader of the children of Israel was to be God, and their laws and their constitution and all the things that defined their lives circled around the things that God had given them. So the theme of this section is kind of to enshrine the law and the proper role of the succession of leadership, and then the ultimate authority of the covenant mandate over the human institutions. So verses 1 through 8 here is kind of a presentation of Joshua. So let's look at verses 1 through 5 starting out. And Moses went and spake these words to all Israel, and he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I can no longer go out and come in. And Jehovah has said to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. Jehovah your God will be over before you. He will destroy these nations from before you, and he shall possess them. Joshua is the one crossing over before you, as Jehovah has said. And Jehovah shall do to them as he did to Sihon and to Og, kings of the Amorites, and the land of those whom he destroyed. And Jehovah shall give them up before your face, so that you may do to them according to all the commandments which I have commanded you. So, we know, we've talked about this for a long time. Moses knew that he was not going to be able to lead the people into the promised land. And this was God's decision. But he didn't want the people to be dismayed because he wasn't going to lead them in there. Moses had led the children of Israel for 80 years. And you get used to one type of leader and depending on one leader. And when that leader changes, there's a lot of not distrust, but fear possibly of that, the next leader is not going to do as good. And we're kind of creatures of habit. We're used to having things a certain way, and any type of change can, cause an upset. But here Moses is assuring the people that even though there's going to be a change in leadership, God is not going to change, and the promise that God had made to Abraham was not going to change. And they're basically going to see the same things happen that had happened before, just with a different leader, basically in command. So he kind of sums this up in verse 6. He says, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for Jehovah your God is he who goes with you, and he will not fail nor forsake you." So he's telling the children of Israel here, don't worry about it. Be of good conscience. Don't be afraid. Everything's going to be okay. God is still there. Even though Moses is not going to be your leader, God is the true leader, and he's not going to change from the people, even though they're used to following Moses. And he's basically telling them, look, I'm not going to be there. There's going to be a different leader there, and prepare yourself for it. And I know in situations that I've been in over the years, you get used to one person being in charge, and there's a fear factor there. And God understood this, and He's telling the people, don't worry about it. Everything is going to be okay because I'm still going to be with you. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verses 7 and 8. "And Moses called to Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, Be strong and of good courage, for you must go with this people to the land which Jehovah has sworn to their fathers to give it to them, and you shall cause them to inherit it. And Jehovah is he who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not fail you nor forsake you. Do not fear, do not be dismayed." So Moses here is encouraging Joshua pretty much the same way that he is encouraging, he is encouraging the people also, that God is going to be faithful in his promise. And this is an appropriate thing for Moses to encourage Joshua. Now Joshua has been in the background. He's kind of been the heir apparent for some time. He was a general in their army. He led them to several major victories, and he was a known quantity to the people of Israel. And I would suspect that Moses, being the good leader that he was, had properly prepared Joshua for this task that he was going to do. And in talking about Joshua, he was probably a little bit apprehensive too. It's hard sometimes to follow a great leader, and even though you may be a good leader yourself, you have a little bit of anxiety because you just say, "Well, I can't do the job." I was reading a book here not too long ago about Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Now, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was obviously Teddy Roosevelt's son. And one of the comments in the book was that he had a very hard life growing up, because if he did something good, they would say, "Wow, just like his dad." And when he did something bad, they'd say, "Well, Big Teddy wouldn't have done it that way." So it's kind of a tough situation. And Joshua was going to be in this same situation. And I think he understood that. And, Moses here is encouraging him and letting him know that he's up to the job, number one. And number two, God is going to be there, and he's not going to forsake him. And if he follows the things that God tells him to do, then everything is going to be all right. And we see here in verse 8 how he emphasizes that. He says the Lord is going to go before. He's going to prepare the way. Everything's going to be ready to go when you get there. He's going to be with Joshua. He's going to accompany him through his journey. He's going to lead him, and he's going to allow him and help him and guide him to make the decisions that needs to be made. And he's not going to fail him. He's going to give him good counsel, and he's always going to be there, and he's never going to be disappointed in the things that God tells him to do, and he can expect this all the time, and he's not going to forsake him. He knows that without him, that he can't do anything, but with him, he's going to be able to accomplish all the things that need to be accomplished. Comments about those verses?
Joshua also has seen how much rebellion the people have caused over the last 40, 50 years.
He's lived through every bit of it. Yeah. He's lived through.
Be of good courage, because you're going to have to put up with it.
Right. And it's kind of funny when you're the number 2 person. That's actually, thinking back on my fire service career, the best job I ever had was assistant chief, because got to run the fire ground, got to do all the cool stuff. But when all the bad stuff came, it was the chief's problem. But then when you get to be the chief, it's a different deal, because it's not everybody else's problem. It's your problem. And it's kind of funny. Robbie Robson took my place here at Cerrito, and it wasn't very long into the deal that he found out that the chief wasn't as stupid as he thought he was. And it was kind of funny to sit in the meetings and listen to him say the same things that I was saying that he used to object to. So there's a thing in there about going from number 2 into the number 1 position. All right, let's look at verses 9 through 13. And what we're going to talk about here is the 7th year covenant renewal ceremony. And Moses, this is a very important thing that Moses puts in here to remind the people of the covenant in a formal way. So let's look at verses 9 through 13. And Moses wrote this law and delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the covenant of Jehovah, and to all the elders of Israel. And Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of 7 years, at the set time of the year of the release, in the feast of the tabernacles, when all of Israel has come to appear before Jehovah your God, in the place which he shall choose, you shall read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people, men and women, the little ones, and your strangers who is within your gates, so that they may hear and that they may learn and fear Jehovah your God, and be careful to do all the words of this law, and that their sons who have not known many hear and learn to fear Jehovah your God, as long as you live in the land where you go over Jordan to possess it. So Moses here has made a written record of what he wants the children of Israel to be read during this time period. And he assigned this important task to the priests and to the elders, and made it one of their duties that they need to regularly republish the law of the covenant. And the effect of this was to associate the priests and the elders with Joshua in the responsibility of the rule of and the esteem of Israel. So, Moses is kind of delegating some of the responsibility that he had, some of it to Joshua, but he's also making sure that Joshua was having assistance in doing this, and he was making it the responsibility of the priests and the elders to do this. So by doing this, basically what he's done, he's got the religious side covered, and he's got the civil side covered, because he's got all these groups together. And the law not only affects the religious side, but it also affects the civil side also. So more important, all the covenant people together with human authorities in the covenant community were placed under the lordship of the giver of the law. And the giver of the law obviously was God. So by doing this, it's reminding the people that even though Joshua is their leader here on earth, God is the ultimate leader. And before he died, Moses left this written document with the leaders of the nation, so that they would have it down. In Joshua 1:8, it says, "The book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate on it by day and by night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall act wisely. So Joshua understood the importance of having this law written down. Now, it's kind of interesting to note and read some of the comments of some of the scholars. There's the broad group pretty much feels like it's the whole law, but there's a small group that feels like it's just the book of Deuteronomy that is read here, and I don't think that's I think that's making it too narrow, and I don't think that that Moses would leave out things that there were things in all the other books that Moses wrote that was very important, and every book is not completely comprehensive. So I think that what we're talking about here is reading the law in total, not just the book of Deuteronomy. So the national leaders were to read this law to the whole nation in front of all of Israel every 7th year, which corresponds with the sabbatical year. And the time during that year is at the Feast of the Tabernacles, is the time that it was designed to read. So this reading would remind and instruct God's people concerning the graciousness of God toward them. And if you'll notice, it said in there that it was done for some of them who had not necessarily heard all of the law. During that 7 years, there was going to be children that were born, and if you read something like that to a 3-year-old, they're not going to comprehend a lot of it, but 7 years later, they're going to be 10 years old. They'll comprehend a little bit more, and then 7 years later, when they start to become an adult, then they'll understand it even more. So, this was something that was designed to continue to instruct the children of Israel, not only for the present generation, but for the generations to come. And it was common in other Near Eastern countries for the priests to assemble the people periodically and read to them whatever the king's decrees were at that particular time. So this was an important part of the life of the children of Israel, so that they would continue to follow in the ways of the Lord. Of course, we know, and like Kevin said, things weren't always smooth sailing in with the children of Israel, as we all know. Comments or questions about those verses? All right, the next few verses is basically verses 14 through 23 is the commissioning of Joshua. In the first part of the chapter, it was kind of setting up Joshua and saying, okay, Joshua is going to be the leader. But that was Moses talking. And what we're going to see here in this next bunch is basically the coronation or the commissioning of Joshua into the position that he was going to have. So let's look at verses 14 and 15. And Jehovah said to Moses, behold, your days are coming near to die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the congregation, and I shall charge him. And Moses and Joshua went, and they presented themselves in the tabernacle of the congregation. And Jehovah appeared in the tabernacle in a pillar of a cloud, and the pillar of a cloud stood over the door of the tabernacle. So back in verses 1 through 8, Moses had presented Joshua to the people as the heir apparent. Now God is going to officially commission him and to make Joshua the official leader, give him his new responsibility, and make it clear beyond a doubt that he was going to be the successor to Moses. Now we see here that he did this in the tabernacle, which of course was the meeting tent. We studied back in Exodus about the very elaborate setup that the tabernacle was, and this was the appropriate place for the ceremony. That's where the Holy of Holies were, where the presence of God was with the high priest. And what better place could you have for God to come and commission Joshua to be the successor of Moses. Comments about those verses? All right, the bulk of this next section is God's revelation to Moses concerning Israel's future apostasy. And this starts with verse 16 and goes on to verse 22. So let's read those verses right now. It says, And Jehovah said to Moses, Behold, you shall sleep with your fathers, and this people shall rise up and go lusting after the gods of the strangers of the land which they are going into their midst. And they will forsake me and break my covenant which I made with them. Then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will stay in that day. Have not these evils come on us because our God is not among us? And I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they have done, for they shall turn to other gods. Now therefore write this song for you and teach it to the sons of Israel. Put it in their mouth so that this song may be a witness of me against the sons of Israel. For when I shall have brought them to the land which I swore to their fathers, the land that flows with milk and honey, and they shall have eaten and have become satisfied and become fat, and then turn to other gods and serve them and provoke me and break my covenant. And it shall be when many evils and troubles have found them, this song shall testify against them as a witness, for it shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their seed. For I know their imagination, which they do, even now before I have brought them into the land which I swore. And Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the sons of Israel. Which, of course, this is the song of Moses, which we're going to talk about in the next chapter. So the Lord here is telling Moses that eventually the children of Israel are going to turn away from him. They're going to start to follow other gods, and the reason is, they're living the good life, and since they're living the good life, they don't feel like they need to depend on God. So the Lord is telling Moses that He's going to hide His face, or He's going to turn His back on the children of Israel, and His light is not going to shine on them anymore. And when this happens, the children of Israel, they're not going to be living the good life that they were living when they started out. So to discourage this apostasy that was going to happen, God gave Moses a song, and this is revealed to him in chapter 32, verses 1 through 43, which he'll probably start with maybe next week. So the works to which he was to write down, and he was to teach this to the people in order to help remind them of God's faithfulness. We learn a lot of things by singing songs and memorizing verses and poems and things along that line. God understood this, and that's basically what we're doing here. Is Moses is composing a poem, is more or less what the Song of Moses is, that the people recite to remind them of these things. And since it was a song, the people would, once having learned it by heart, repeat the words frequently and remember them easily. There's songs that we sing that we don't need the songbook. We know what the words are. We've memorized the words, and we know what the meaning is. I think everybody in this church building today can sing "Jesus Loves Me." You learn it when you're little, and you remember it, all through the years. And there's songs that everybody, depending on their age, knows the words to. I can still sing some of the Beatles songs, and some people look at it, who's the Beatles, stuff like that. But and I'm sure there's others in here that can sing it a lot prettier than I can. So the singing of it would later haunt the people and remind them of the things that they have lost because they have disobeyed. They've disobeyed God. So songs often remain after the commandments are forgotten, and it was this that might remember the things that Moses had written, and he instructed them to write things down, which is important so that you don't forget it. So this has kind of become like this will become a national song, and it'll take hold in the memories of the people, and it can be a powerful influence to stirring the people's innermost feelings and goodwill toward God. Because too often God's people forget what they ought to remember and remember what they ought to forget. I thought that was a good passage to put in there. Comments about those verses?
It's incredible how God has the foresight to see how people are going to fail. I mean, He loves His people so much, He's willing to craft a song that will prevent them from doing that in the future, even though He knows that they're going to fail again. He knows that they're going to fall from grace. He knows that they're going to be conquered by other nations, but He still prevails.
Right. Good thought.
I like also that Moses, which it said in the first chapter there, that he got to the point where he couldn't go in and out among people. He was getting old.
Well, 120, I think that would qualify for getting old.
He later says, that his eyes are not dim, so
Right.
but physically,
Right.
And I'm sure that he probably thought when God told him this, I'm glad I'm born. I don't want to see when the children of Israel go through all this stuff. When they leave the Lord and when they're persecuted, and God's going to turn His hand against them. Not listen to them.
Because, I mean, you think about it, look at all that Moses had invested all those years in the children of Israel. Getting them out of Egypt, leading them through the wilderness, all this stuff. He had a lot invested. He really did. So basically, here is Joshua's commission and charge here in verse 23. And he commanded Joshua, the son of Nun, and said, "Be strong and of good cheer, or good courage, for you shall bring the sons of Israel into the land which I swore to them, and I will be with you." So God has given here the commandment to Joshua and commissioned him and anointed him as the new leader. And I'm sure at this point Joshua feels the burden of command. Not that he has not felt the burden of command before, but though he had some pretty big shoes to fill. And obviously God knew that he was up to it, because he had proven time and time again his character, his competence, and his courage. And that's a good thing to have, is the character, the competence, and the courage. Comments about that verse? All right, let's look at verses 24 through where we're going to look at 24 through 27. This is basically talks about the preservation of God's words. And it happened when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book until they were finished. Moses commanded the Levites who carried the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah, saying, "Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah your God, so that it may be there for a witness against you. For I will know your rebellion and your stiff neck. Behold, while I am still alive with you today, you have been rebellious against Jehovah, and how much more after my death." So with the installation of Joshua on the part of God, the official life of Moses was pretty much brought to a close. He was now in a retirement situation. He was the leader emeritus, let's kind of put it that way. And having returned from the tabernacle, he finished the writing of the law that he was working on, and then he gave this book of the law to the Levites with a command to put it by the side of the Ark of the Covenant, that it might be there as a witness against the people, so that they'll know the things that they should be doing that they're not doing. Because he knew from experience, and not only that, but God had revealed it, that there was going to be rebellion, and they were going to go back to their stiff-neckedness that they had been. So Moses here charges the Levitical priests with the care and the keeping of this law, and it wasn't necessarily a book; it was more probably a scroll that was written in Moses' hand, or maybe by a scribe being dictated by Moses. It's not really revealed to us. And again, some of the scholars feel this is just the book of Deuteronomy, but most scholars feel that it was the law in its entirety. And it was normal for the priest to bear the responsibility in that time period. For they were responsible for the records, the written laws, the scrolls, and things along that line. But we note here that this scroll is not put in the ark. It's put beside the ark, because we have a pretty good record of the things that were in the Ark of the Covenant, and the scroll of the law was not one of them. And there was a group of Levites, and I'm going to butcher this name. It's called the Cohathetites, were the priests that were actually charged with carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And this song that was mentioned back in 15 and 16, and the scroll were going to be the two witnesses of the people's obedience and also of their disobedience. So they were going to kind of be put there. There's a standard, and when you're following the standard, you're obeying it. But when you disobey, you go back to the standard, and that standard is going to be the witness against them for the things that they've disobeyed. Comments about those verses? All right, let's move on here and go to verses 28 and 29. Gather to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, so that I may speak these words in their ear, and call heaven and earth to record against them. For I know that after my death you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will happen to you in the latter end of the days, because you will do evil in the sight of Jehovah, to provoke him to anger through the works of your hand. So here Moses is directly handing over the book of the law as he was directed, and he's given it to the elders of all the tribes. And together, with the official persons together around him, all this information is given out. This is not given out to all the people. It's given out to the priests and to the leaders of the individual tribes. And he's basically laying it out for them and telling them what God had revealed to him, that he knows that this is going to happen. And you kind of have to wonder what their thinking is. Well, kind of like maybe this is not going to happen on our watch, that type of thing. And maybe it didn't, but it did happen in due time. The things that God had told Moses was going to happen did actually happen. So he summoned all these people, he addressed them, and he gave them the book of the law. And the elders and the officials, as the civil authorities of the congregation, were collected together by him, and they heard this song that he had written, and it came out of his mouth into their memory. But there was also a written record of it. So if they didn't get the tune the first time, they had an opportunity to go back and study it a little bit. And he's really nailing this home here. He says he's calling on heaven and earth to be a witness. He's really trying to drive the point home to these people how important it is for these things to be followed and for this song to be learned. So he warns the priests, he warns the elders and the official. So we're seeing the religious leaders being warned. We're seeing the tribal leaders being warned. We're seeing the military leaders being warned, the judges, the civil magistrates, everybody in authority are being warned of this future apostasy that God has revealed that it's going to happen. And he didn't also only reveal it to Moses. He also revealed this to Joshua also. So Joshua knew pretty much what was going to happen also. So he was going to be guarding against it also. And it's important for these spiritual leaders to be ready for what's coming. It's probably not going to start at the top. It's going to start at the bottom with the people. And they're the ones that's going to be living high on the hog, and they're the ones that's going to be out there and they're around the priests and the leaders and stuff, and the leaders are telling them not to do it. So we want to do it anyway. We're doing this and we don't care what you say. So it usually starts at the bottom and works its way up. So it's important that the leaders are vigilant, looking for these things to happen to try to nip it in the bud before it takes hold. Comments about those verses. All right, let's look at verse 30 here and finish up this chapter. And Moses spoke in the ears of all the congregation of Israel the words of this song until their conclusion. So, this verse 30 is kind of the introduction to the song of Moses that's written in chapter 32. And this is setting up pretty much the last official thing that Moses is going to be doing to prepare the children of Israel before he goes up onto the mountain to view the promised land and his subsequent death on that mountain. So this pretty much is almost the end of his career, and we can see here even at the end his concern and his wanting the children of Israel to do the right thing, and he doesn't want them to suffer bad things, because a lot of them had suffered bad things before, and he was the last pretty much of his generation, and other than Joshua, Joshua had seen the things in Egypt, but most of these other people hadn't done it. So any comments about that chapter?
I still amazes me because it talks about different times in there when he calls the elders and the leaders of the tribes. There's times also like this here in verse 34. He speaks to the assembly of Israel. How do you speak to 2 million people? Without some supernatural help.
Right.
I've always wondered, did he have to shout? Did he just talk and everybody heard it?
That's always kind of been my impression. It's just like when Jesus would talk to the multitude. They didn't have PA systems back then, but they all heard what he said.
You try to talk in front of a stadium today, you just say 70,000 people.
Right.
Some of them may hear you, but all of them not.
Right.
But for 2 million people.
Right. And what makes it even more impressive is he's 120 years old. That makes it even. Huh?
They had people that would repeat it. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but even still, for 2 million people. Yeah. Well, but the thing about that is, it's kind of like you line up a bunch of people, and the first one whispers in the ear of the second one, and by the time it gets to the end, you can't even tell what they've said. But that's a good point, and I truly believe that when it said speak to the elders and the priests, he did. When he talked to everybody that they were there. All right, so we're a couple minutes early, but I'm going to let Bill start with chapter 32 next week, and I appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.